1996 brought us a legendary serial protocol specification, USB. It started at 1.5 megabits per second and went up to a blazing 12 megabits per second. 23 years, 12 different connectors later, we are looking at a 4,000x increase in performance and the new generation of USB. Apparently 3 generations wasn't enough, so we're in for Generation 4, creatively named, you guessed it, USB4. Let's dig into what's new and different about the latest gen of USB from one of the people who made USB4 happen. Crowd favorite and first ever Double E's Talk Tech guest, Jit Lim.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Double E's Talk Tech. My name is Mike Hoffman.
And I'm Daniel Bogdanoff, and frequent listeners of the podcast will recognize the voice or face, or maybe both, of Jit Lim. Jit, thank you so much for coming back onto the podcast.
You bet. I'm happy to be here.
So remind us right up into the microphone what you do, kind of what's your background, what's your experience?
Yeah, I'm the Keysight lead for the Type-C ecosystem. So I'm responsible for Keysight solutions for USB, Thunderbolt, DisplayPort, which are in the Type-C ecosystem today.
Great. And last time we had you on the podcast, you were kind of in the secret throes of working on new technologies around the USB space, and we couldn't say too much. There were like words we had to avoid and phrases we couldn't say, or we'd get in, IP prison or whatever they call it. But since that has happened, there's been a new spec release. Is that right?
That's correct. So there's always secret stuff which I can't talk about. But earlier this year, the USB-IF officially announced the USB4 standard. So we can pretty much talk about USB4 today.
Okay.
Based on the fact that it's been announced.
So USB4, the first question, when do I get it? When is it going to show up in my computer?
I'm going to speculate, but I think it's sooner rather than later. And the reason I say that is because it's also public. It's because USB4 is going to be based on the Thunderbolt 3 protocol, which has been shipping on your computer for the past 4 years, perhaps. That's why USB4 will come to market very quickly.
And it'll be the same Type-C connector?
That's a great point. So prior to USB4, you could implement USB 3.2 using, say, a C or an A or a B. But when you go to USB 4, there is no alternative. You have to use a Type-C connector.
Okay.
No longer an option.
So since 1995, we've had the USB 1.0 rectangle, 4-dimensional connector that it only works after you've turned it over 3 times. We're now finally killing it off for good. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, it's a good point. So the connector itself will go away, the non-C connectors, so all the variants of the A's and many variants of B's. I can't even keep track of how many variants there are. The connectors will go away. But the thing to remember is the Type-C connector will still send signals all the way back to the early days of USB 1 and 2.
Hey everyone, I wanted to briefly take advantage of this captive audience, and by captive audience, I mean audience that can fast forward or close the tab or stop the video, turn off the car, or just even tune out for a while. So it's not really a captive audience, but the team put together an awesome new ebook called Tech Trends, which explores how to prep for technologies like DDR5, C6, PCIe, Thunderbolt, PAM4, and more. Go to eestalktech.com, doublestalktech.com, and download it now. It's free. Go check it out.
The connectors will go away, but the thing to remember is the Type-C connector will still send signals all the way back to the early days of USB 1 and 2.
Okay,
so
fully backwards compatible.
Fully backwards compatible. So USB 1, 2, 3.1, 3.0, 3.1.
And you just get a little adapter,
3.2.
like a C to A adapter, and that's how it would work, or what?
No, it's all in the Type-C connector.
Mm-hmm.
So there are dedicated lines for D plus and minus for USB 2, and there are TX, RX lanes that will still send 5 gig, 10 gig quote legacy USB plus the new 20 gig by 2 USB 4. So it's all there in this new Type-C connector.
So before we go too deep, I want to. You're actually the first guest ever on the podcast, so it's only fitting that we introduce a new segment to this podcast while you're here, and we're only going to bring this up when we have a new technology that we're discussing. But if there's one theme that we've seen in this podcast since episode 1, it's not, space lasers, it's not autonomous driving, it's Moore's Law. Comes up just about every time. So we're playing a new game on the podcast. We're calling it Does It Double? So is the data rate doubled? Is the speed doubled? Is the data transfer doubled? Mike and I each have a card with an answer on it. I'm going to give this one to Mike, and we're going to flip them, and you tell us which one it is. Okay? So does USB4 double? On 3. 1, 2, 3.
Yes, it does double.
Okay, so let's show those cards there. They both say yes. Because if there's one thing we've seen, it always doubles.
Even the answer doubled.
Even the answer doubled, yeah. I put a nice little asterisk on this one because sometimes they cheat. I think USB 3 or PCIe 3 or PCIe 4, like the actual rate doesn't double, but they change their encoding scheme to make the data rate double. So
can I keep this?
You can keep it until the next time we interview someone.
I have a great button on my desk that I can hit. It's like the Staples Easy button, but it just has different iterations of the word no.
That's right.
So now I can have a yes card.
Okay,
For when someone comes by and I can say yes to something.
Yes, but then it has an asterisk on it so that you can say yes, but.
Yes, but. Perfect. I like it.
All right.
Yes.
So that is,
definitely
does it double? Doubles. Okay, so what does it double to?
There's more complexity behind the scenes. So the thing you need to know is that there was a 3.2 spec USB. And what it did was take Gen 2 at 10 gig and double it to 20 by running 2 lanes of 10.
Okay.
USB 4 will run at 20 gig by 2, which means it doubles to 40 gig actually. So I don't think you and I talk about 3.2, but it's 20 gig times 2.
When did USB 3.2 spec release? I feel like it was very recently.
It was probably a good year and a half ago that the spec was released.
So how future are we going to see a USB 5.0 in another couple of years? Are these technologies really being maxed out? Are there applications where that 2 by 10 lane just simply wasn't enough? Or is this kind of just a future proofing?
I think it's safe to say there will probably be a next generation of USB in sometime in the future that will will increase the bit rate, and we can talk maybe in a year about whether it doubles.
Okay, we'll save him. I'll file him away. I'll have to go, beat up Mike to get his sign back.
I'll hit the no button.
You have to bring that next time in case if the answer is ever no, we'll have to do a big graphic or something and big buzzer sound effect.
It's a real popular item around the aisles.
It is.
It's not vulgar or anything. It should be podcast safe.
It is, yeah. You just hit it until it is podcast safe, right? Is it USB 4.0?
Yes, it'll be USB. So far, the public information just says USB 4.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if they're going to rebrand it to USB 4 or USB space 4.0.
Okay.
They will be very specific when that comes out.
It seemed like in the 20 minutes of research I did before this podcast started, look at me, researching, there was some controversy about whether it would be USB 4, no space, or USB space 4. And, it seems really nice to think that it'll just be USB 4 with no space, but...
That's what we have seen from the USB IF. It's just USB 4, no space. So
Okay.
Which is a little bit different from what we have seen with, say, USB 2.0 or 3.0 or 3.2. It's always been space. So we'll see.
So the only other new recent USB protocol I'm aware of, I think, is eUSB2, and they did that same with the no space. Is that correct?
That is also correct. Now that you mention it, I haven't looked that closely, but yeah, eUSB, which is also, it's public now also. So I got to pause to make sure I don't get in trouble. But eUSB is public. You can download the spec of the USB IF, and you are correct. It just says eUSB2, no space. That's also another, shall we say, a new variant in the USB ecosystem.
Okay. So how much of 3 are they bringing up into 4? So like for USB 3 with the Type-C connector, I never really know, am I going to get good, fast charging out of this? Am I going to be able to hook up a display to this? It's kind of this, I have to pull out data sheets to figure out whether I'm getting Thunderbolt, whether I'm getting HDMI, that type of thing. Is USB 4 going to be a little more standardized?
That's a great question. I think part of the reason why there was less uniformity was because you could implement USB 3.0, 3.1, 3.2 using, say, a standard A connector. And even though PD could be implemented on the standard A, most customers did not implement PD on standard A. With USB 4, you must implement USB PD. So the user experience will be quite different. It's just a requirement of USB 4 that USB PD must be implemented. So things like Type-C, the flipping, the power contract, all is required to be there when you do USB 4. You cannot say omit USB PD.
Sure.
It's not optional anymore either.
So I guess what I'm gathering is this isn't just a speed increase. There's a lot of sounds like house cleaning that the USB IF is going through, where USB 3.2 was a migration path with a lot of options for developers to implement. With USB 4, it's like you will implement PD, you will use Type-C. Are there any other things along those lines that people can expect?
Yeah, good point. So for sure, we have this doubling of the bit rate. We know that. For sure, you have the requirement to do Type-C connector only. There's no
I'm so excited
other
about
ones
that.
that you can. You cannot do it with these many other variants. You must do PD, and you must be backward compatible, which I mentioned. So you cannot ignore. You cannot ship at least on the host side. In fact, let me think about this. This USB. I don't think you can ship a product that says, well, I only want to do USB 4 and nothing else.
Okay.
I think the spec will require that you do USB 4, 3.2, and USB 2. So it's going to be a much better user experience. But of course, as you can imagine, the more stuff you put in there, it's a lot more complex to implement and test.
Yes. I just spilled my drink, so we're going to pause.
Oh, no.
We're back. I'm going to now pretend to sip coffee out of my mug. Well, my new Double E's Talk Tech podcast by Keysight mug. Cheers, everybody.
Yeah, awesome work stepping the game up.
Very nice.
Thank you to the powers that be for funding our mugs.
Yeah, how did we find the budget for this? I mean, this had to cost tens of thousands of dollars.
Oh, my goodness. It was like thousands of cents at least per mug.
Yeah.
Maybe not thousands per mug, but for the whole order at least was thousands of cents.
Between the multi-camera setup and these new mugs, it's like a whole new show.
I know, it is. It's
Living
actually
large.
we have revved.
Living large.
Yeah.
You might not know this. We've revved to season 2. This is Double E's Talk Tech season 2 now.
Well, I remember the first episode we did with you was like in the corner of the break room on like a table that we wheeled out of the cafeteria. Now we got our own room.
I remember. And I had a plastic cup the first time.
Yeah. And we had this
cup.
round tabletop that we set on top of a little cocktail table, so the whole thing was wobbly. And man, those chumps 40 episodes ago ish, plus or minus. I don't know where this will go in season 2 because I haven't even filmed a trailer yet, but we're gonna have a trailer and everything. It's gonna be awesome.
Dang, looking forward to it.
Yes. Because, gosh darn it, we're going to keep this podcast going. Anyway, so Jit was talking about how everything's mandatory, and then you sounded like you might have a question.
Well, I was wondering if there's any new... So I know USB 3 added essentially all these nested protocols within it. HDMI, DisplayPort, all that is within USB, which makes sense. It's trying to be a universal bus. Does USB 4 add any more sub protocols? I don't know, probably not the right verbiage for it. But.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. So the Type-C ecosystem still has the notion of what we call alternate mode, such that over Type-C you can send USB 4 or DP, which is DP alternate mode.
DisplayPort.
Yeah, DisplayPort. But what's unique in USB 4 is the notion of tunneling. It's really a new concept that did not exist in USB 3 before. Tunneling essentially says that over the USB 4 protocol, you can send packets of USB, you can send packets of DP and PCI Express over the USB 4 protocol. So it's really a new notion, this notion of tunneling.
If you get them both at the same time, that means you can like run, but I can already run a display and transfer data at the same time. Right? Is that different?
There could be a couple use cases depending on the link partner. So for example, you could send DP data over the USB 4 protocol, or you could be in alternate mode and sending DP also. So those are two choices you can have when you implement USB 4, which is really unique and different.
So in alternate mode, the USB cable in essence is just pretending to be a DisplayPort cable, for example. It's just running in an alternate mode. It just happens to use USB connectors. In this tunneling mode, it's using some sort of Ethernet-style packaging protocol within USB to send chunks of DisplayPort data.
Yeah, it is the
without switching
USB4
modes.
protocol, actually. It is USB4.
Interesting.
Huh.
So now this is Jit speculating, right? So you say to yourself, well, why would you do that? So there's some possibility that in the future, customers may not run DP alternate mode and just run everything over the USB4 protocol. That could be one option, because today, if you have alternate mode, you need a separate silicon, if you will.
Sure.
USB4 silicon,
Okay.
and then alternate mode, say DP silicon.
So that's like another part of the PHY that
Another
you have
part
to have,
of the PHY you have to do.
and that adds costs and everything.
Right. So I'm just speculating about what the roadmap could look like. But today, for sure, a host that does USB4, because there are so many DP monitors out there that may not be USB4 compatible. So for the
Right.
foreseeable future, you
Dang.
cannot ignore DP from a
Right.
host perspective, because there are legacy, if you will, legacy monitors that only run DP. So you would
Yeah, that's
if
what I
you
use.
ignore DP, you may not be able to connect, say, a host to a legacy DP monitor if you did not have DP alternate.
So what you're
Say
saying is
sorry, go ahead.
all your technology is obsolete. Go buy new everything. It's kind of-
Exactly.
yeah. Okay.
So it probably won't happen for a while.
When you say a legacy DisplayPort monitor, you don't mean one with an actual DisplayPort connector. It's one that has a USB 3 or Type-C connector that runs DisplayPort alternate mode, which isn't even legacy. But it's probably still cutting edge
That's
at the moment,
a correct
right?
statement. So there is like a DP connector, and there's like a mini DP connector, and there's also a Type-C alternate mode DP connector. So when I say legacy, I'm actually meant the Type-C DP alternate mode.
So basically, like a year and a half ago is now legacy, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Or will be legacy.
Yeah, my reference is a little bit skewed because Keysight's main focus is to help very leading edge
Right.
customers. So I'm skewed by stuff that may not appear for a long time.
Yeah, because once the IP is developed for the filer, people just drop it in, and they don't they might do some basic testing to get certified, but they're not really trying to debug and get stuff working. Or is it?
I think it depends on the status adopter. So if you look at generally in the ecosystem, IP and silicon always comes way before, very often
Right.
before the spec is even published. Because
Yeah.
basically what we need to do is Keysight needs to help our customers ensure that their simulation and the pathfinding silicon works before they publish the spec.
Right.
So,
You have to make sure you don't publish a spec that invalidates someone's hard work, right?
exactly.
And
So
that's why you
that's
pay
really
into
the
spec
sequence.
and-
So
okay.
when it, by the time the
That'd be a power move.
industry sees the spec, the fact is there's a high likelihood that the early silicon has been tested to validate that the simulation, the signal integrity, the testing of the spec is valid.
Yeah.
We
And
don't
this is
get
all
surprised.
You're making a spec that's impossible to build. You don't
exactly
want to do that,
or
right?
test. So there's a lot of background work that has already happened
Okay.
before the specs released.
So without naming names, obviously, is USB4 already getting prototyped and tested?
Yeah. So at last week's USB workshop, we had a USB4 testing event.
Okay. And this was a August 2019 event.
Yeah, August 2019. You got me with a year and a month. But at last week's event, we actually got to test a number of USB4 products. Now,
Okay.
I want to start and say, this was a confidential testing event, so I can't really share customer names, etc. But I just want to let you know that, we the spec will be out soon, and we have been helping our customers test for quite a while, actually, including at the event last week.
And I expect not a lot of surprises in terms of who actually shows up for those things. Everyone kind of knows each other, and it's more of a reunion than
I think
a
that's
frenemy
true
reunion.
to large extent. The way the scheduling is done is when we schedule we send the official schedule out, we usually have TID means test ID number. So the official schedule has no customer names in it. And when they come in, they get a TID number. And so when we do the test reports, it's got a TID number.
Interesting.
Yeah, but as you can imagine, it's really hard to control people walking in and out.
Yeah.
Sometimes we do a really good job with that, but everything is confidential. There's no customer names in any of these schedules. It's got a test ID number.
Okay.
And so that's all we see.
But
There's
you
no
know
customer
Joe
names.
from Acme Co.
Well, because I spend so much time in the ecosystem, I personally know who these folks are, but the scheduling and testing is set up such that nobody should know who's in the room.
Okay.
And depending on, I think you mentioned earlier about brown bags, some customers are particularly sensitive, and in that case, when they're in the room, the doors and windows have to be closed.
Yeah.
And only, for example, the Keysight team can be there.
Yeah.
Some customers are a little bit more lax. The door may be open, but no one, basically the way you look at it is only Keysight and the TID customer, TID, test ID customer, can be in the room at one time. There's no one else
Fascinating.
allowed in that room at that moment in
Okay.
time. That's how it's scheduled. It's very, very well done and very confidential.
So these customers have prototype hardware, and we're coming in with our test equipment with potentially confidential testing routines and software of our own and making sure everything handshakes properly. Is that the idea?
The testing procedures are not completely confidential in the sense that if you are in the USB-IF working groups, you actually have early previews of draft versions
Right.
of these documents. And so these help companies like Keysight and the customers determine what needs to be tested, to be verified the test, make sure they kind of work. To your point earlier, we don't want to release a spec or CTS that's so different.
Yeah.
And so we actually have some preliminary information that tells us how you should be testing at, say, 0.94 of the CTS.
Okay. What is CTS? Compliance test specification?
Exactly. So there's a spec, which is what everybody designs to, but following the spec, there's a document called a CTS, and you're correct. It's a compliance test spec, and that's how you test to it.
Okay. So this is, I'm going to spitball a little bit here, and maybe this isn't quite where you spend your time thinking about stuff, but I'd be interested in your guys' opinion on this. So USB, universal serial bus. I would argue that up until Type-C didn't really do much of a good job of being universal, right? I mean, my desk setup is infuriating. I can't wait till USB4 is ready. I have a docking station with a VGA output and an HDMI output, and then the oscilloscope at my desk has a DisplayPort output, and so I have two different monitors, and they're running different resolutions that don't coincide well together, and it's just a nightmare. So it sounds like USB is going full speed ahead at trying to become something that could be universal. When does that happen, and are there any more protocols out there, like, I don't know, PCI? Does PCI eventually get rolled into USB for use internally? Maybe not something you would connect to a host or a device, but how far is that kind of on the roadmap to just be everything's USB?
So there are two parts of the question. So I'll address the PCI part later, and I think you answered it already. But there is evidence that Type-C is getting adoption by various industry groups. So if you look at this, the connectors you mentioned, for example, the Type-C connector is owned, if you will, and led by the USB-IF, the USB.org.
Right.
You mentioned DP. There's a whole different organization that leads that. It's the VESA group. There's another display connects HDMI. It's also led by different groups. So if you look at the ecosystem, it's not really about USB not wanting to be universal, but it's one reason is because there are other ecosystems and different organizations that lead or drive the HDMI standards and connectors and technologies.
Okay.
And so similar for DP, that's a whole different organization. So that's one reason why you see these different connectors and technologies, because they're whole different organizations. But there's some evidence that there might be the ability to combine some of these organizations or standards in the future. For example, DP alt mode was the first step in the direction where the VESA group who runs DP, shall we say, determined that they would be willing to send DP over a Type-C connector.
Okay.
So that's one step in the direction. And HDMI also has a variant. that also runs on Type-C. So if you look at the display organizations, two organizations have started some discussions about sending their technology over Type-C. So the journey has started in that direction.
So USB IF is kind of this amoeba that's just slowly like reaching out tendrils and trying to
I think
lure in other
they've
smaller
done is
specs.
they have, shall we say, contributed the specs.
Yeah.
They have the way I think their position is, look, we have this connector. You're free to adopt it because we have this alternate mode that we can use for your special connectors. So I believe that's how they have tried to enable the universalness of the USB connector.
Okay.
Well, that's exciting to hear because I mean I'm sure there's reasons for this, and we don't need to get into it. But I would say 99.99% of people would not be able to articulate the pros and cons of HDMI versus DisplayPort. They're just a cable, right? You find the one that works with whatever you got. So merging all of them together and ideally maybe getting all the benefits of each for whatever reasons engineers might choose HDMI over DisplayPort. At least now customers don't have to worry about interoperability problems if everything's running the same cable, the same connector,
Right.
and it just works in the background, which is interesting.
What does it take to actually implement something like that? Like, is it a specific? Like, is there extra filer considerations, or is it all higher up in the stack, or how do you actually go about? Because this is a pretty big shift to go from an alt mode to actually like natively supporting this.
Yeah, it's a great question. So because of the new requirements and the backward compatibility, the implementation is very complex. I alluded to that earlier. So first, you need to have a USB4 PHY that runs at 20x2, and it also runs at 10x2. It's got two speeds, what they call Gen 2 at 10 gig and Gen 3. So there are two speeds for USB4. So you need a PHY to do that. I also mentioned that you need to have legacy 3.2. So you need a PHY also that will run at 5 gig USB and 10 gig USB 3.2.
So you have to run, 5 gig USB, and then 5 gig USB 3.2.
Yes.
And then Gen 3, which is 10 gig.
That's correct.
But that's part of USB 4.
You
Or
bring
that's
up,
just... And then
I was
you have...
afraid you would ask that question. So
I need a
it's
table.
actually
I need a
much
spreadsheet.
more complex than that, because should I even scare the audience here? So
Do it.
let's do that. So when you ship a
Nice spooky
USB 4
music.
product, you must ship at 20 gig by 2. It must run in that mode. But there are fallback positions. For example, if the link doesn't run at 20 by 2,
Right.
for whatever reason, one side is broken, it can gear shift down to 20 by 1.
Okay.
But that's not a, what do you call a messaging mode. You don't ship or publicize this mode. It's a fallback position.
It's like a triage. Let's just get something going. Sort of mode.
Just so that thing's running. And then it can also switch to 10 by 2. And we're talking about USB 4 or 10 by 1. Again, these are not publicized modes, but they are like fallback modes.
It's not a mode you would select, but if things don't go well,
work,
that's
just for the user experience. You
Okay.
do that. Then it could switch. It could switch to USB 3.2. Potentially, this, I think we are still working through the details. It could be running at USB 3.2 10 by 2, or USB 3.2 10 by 1, or USB 3.4 5 by 2, or 5 by 1. Again, many of these are these fallback modes. So I want to be clear that you cannot ship or publicize a product. As an example, I'm a 10 gig USB product, but it's 5 by 2. You cannot do that. It's
Sure.
not a valid.
you lose your USB
mode.
sticker if
You lose the sticker, but it can run because we don't want our customers to have a bad user experience because they just want it to run. It may not run at 20 by 2, but if it's running, then it's better than not running at all.
Okay.
So I didn't want to confuse everybody, but there are a lot of modes now. And to be honest with you, USB-IF is really doing a great job of trying to, shall we say, simplify the language. So you're going to see much more simplified language. So for example, I believe, and this is me speculating a little bit, I don't remember, but I think they're going to promote USB 4 as 40 gig only.
Okay.
They're going to use USB 4, 40 gig. That's
Why not?
it. Now, for 5% like me, they're going to ask, well, is it 40 gig? Well, it's 20 by 2, right? Because
We need the yes with the asterisk.
Yeah,
we
we
need the
don't
asterisk.
test 40 gig because
Covered in coffee.
exactly. So you will hear 40 gig only
Okay.
associated with USB 4, I believe. And the reason is because, like I said, it's 20 by 2 required.
Okay, so if you buy a USB 4 product, you get 20 by 2, but it can also do 10 by 2 or 20 by 1 or 10 by 1. And it can also do 3.2, 10 by 2 or 10 by 1 or 5 by 2 or 5 by 1.
Yeah, potentially. And, the
And
reason,
it's backwards compatible, so it
Yeah.
should do 480 meg and 12 meg and 3.1 meg.
And the reason why I say that is only because Keysight's a test and measurement company.
Yeah.
And we have to test all these different modes
Right.
for different speeds and different channel lengths. The customer, I use my mom example, she couldn't care less. When she hooks
Right.
up and works, and it should work at 40 gig, that's all she cares about. Behind
Right.
the scenes, if there was something amiss with, for example, my mom could connect, say, a USB 2 cable between a USB 4 host and device,
Sure.
and it would still work.
Okay.
And she wouldn't know the difference.
Right.
That's not how we want this to work, but
Okay.
it could happen.
For the people. Yeah. That makes sense.
So it's only 40 gigs. So that's how USB 4 will be referred to.
Okay.
I mentioned all those rates because in my world, Keysight cannot test at one rate. Customers
Yeah.
have to understand that. You may have to test all these variants
To get
because
the sticker.
to get a sticker, right? That's just not one 40 gig rate.
Fascinating. I'm just seeing dollar signs. I'm not going to lie. Like when I hear that, I go, oh boy, that's
What are the
making some
main?
people really happy in corner offices. How can we make this CTS more complex?
Oh man, yeah, it's all good there. Are there any main competitors to USB 4? I mean, the one that I can think of is Lightning. The way I see Lightning, and maybe we shouldn't talk about this. I don't know what toes we're stepping on, but I always saw Lightning as Apple's way of developing Type-C before Type-C existed. A good universal cable that does a bunch of stuff. Now that it's out, does Lightning compete with USB 4? Are there any other?
It's gone.
So
standards?
you're talking about a lightning connector to, say, my phone, for example. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, because I guess the Lightning is just the connector and it runs Thunderbolt,
But
right? Is that-
Apple's advertising Type-C now. Like their new phones have
I
Type-C.
think publicly
Really?
you could. I'm positive this is public information, but if you look at a MacBook, it only comes with a Type-C connector, 1 or 2, and if you look at a MacBook Pro, it comes with 4 Type-C connectors.
Okay.
If you look at an iPad Pro, it only comes with a Type-C connector. And if you look at their latest released on the web, super fancy monitor, it only comes with a Type-C connector. So
Okay.
that's all this is public information.
So they went, awesome, you guys nailed it. Perfect. We don't need to do our own proprietary connectors now, which is great.
I definitely cannot comment on that.
Yeah, well, and they're showcasing their new phones in a couple of weeks.
the new phones-
so the new phones
yeah.
might have them.
No, the new phones, like this current generation, it's like the
The XRs,
10
I think
or
those
the-
are
I don't
still
know.
Lightning connectors.
No, they went to USB-C. I remember seeing ads and I was like, I knew it. I was shopping a little bit because I bent my old phone in half mountain biking, so I had to.
Well, maybe we'll need a voiceover edit because maybe by the time this podcast release, they're doing their big event. I think it's September 10th or something like that, where they're releasing probably new phones, new iOS, and all that. So maybe we'll know more.
So if I'm wrong, it'll say like Apple's doing this, right? That's okay. All right, hang on. Time to eat some crow here. The iPad has USB-C. The MacBook has USB-C, but the iPhone, it does not.
Was there any besides that? Are there any other competing standards that even come close to doing what USB 4 does or hope to?
Yeah, I think you brought up earlier, right? If you look at the side of your typical laptop, I think we all have Type Cs now. We still have I still have one because there's some legacy connectors. I think, for sure, in the future, there'll be less and less of those. And it will certainly never run USB 4, a standard A.
So don't invest in Type A flash drives, is what you're saying.
Yeah. So, yeah, I have a Thunderbolt 3 drive, for example, and the thing's a rocket. I mean, I can move like a gig file in like seconds. So even for me, I'm not a power user, but Nobody says no to speed. Things just move a lot quicker because in our world we have to move a lot of data back and forth from our analysis, and that is for my use case. It's just wonderful to have speed for transferring these huge waveform files around.
So there's still nothing. There's nothing really out there then that holds a candle to what we're looking at with USB4. That's what it sounds like.
I'm using my laptop as example, but I believe I've got HDMI, so that's a display technology, which for sure Type-C can address. Publicly too, there are Type-C high performance monitors out there. I think they call them Thunderbolt 3 monitors.
Yeah.
So they are moving. There's evidence that there will be a Type-C native, or rather a USB4 native display. Now, how it's done behind the scenes, who knows, right? It could be tunnel DP. It could just be USB4 straight up display. Those are implementation details, I don't know. But they do exist out there. So the point I was trying to make is that Type-C and USB4 can definitely displace a display connector like HDMI DP, because it can tunnel DP or it can do DP alternate mode.
Okay. We did have an episode with you that was titled "One Connector to End Them All," and I think we're a little bit closer, probably a lot bit closer now, actually. Especially if we're not doing alts, we're just embedding. We're actually about out of time. Is there anything else that we just have to know about USB no space 4 / USB space 4.0?
I think the word to folks listening is it's coming, and if you want to be on the leading edge for silicon or products or technology, you really want to get it on board like immediately, because it's coming and it's coming fast. Way faster than any other standards, again, because it's based on Thunderbolt 3, as opposed to a brand new standard that nobody has seen. Yeah. A lot of the technology is based on the Thunderbolt 3 protocol, and there's a lot of products out there that have shipped successfully in that ecosystem.
So awesome. We'll flash your phone number at the bottom of the screen. If anyone is working on some USB4 technology, just give you a call, right?
That's right. Use my Keysight email. That might work better.
Not your home phone? Okay, fine.
Pro tip, you can email any Keysight employee if you know their name.
Wow.
I'll leave that to you. Speaking of that, we sent Dave Jones a 30 or 60 gig scope for an April Fool's Day video where he pretended to find it in the dumpster. But we borrowed it from our support guy. And apparently his business card was still taped to the top of the box, and in his video, Dave's like, "Oh, who's this Ed Gorbea guy? Here's his show his business card taped to the scope, and it's got his phone number and his email address." And it's like, Ed, I'm so sorry, man.
Did he get anything from any rabid Dave Jones fans? No,
that's
good. That's good. He's got a good community of followers. They wouldn't do that.
Yeah. It's there. Yes, I love that community. Anyway, so we always end with a stupid question. Do you have a stupid question? I could tell by your face that you don't, but I'm stalling to come up with mine. So, okay, go for it.
When are we seeing USB 5? I can't wait any longer.
That's not a stupid question.
How do I answer that question?
Next week? Next podcast?
They're already talking about.
I think we can talk about next gen USB maybe in 6 months, perhaps. I might be able to share some information.
I was not expecting an answer. I was expecting you to say 4.0 just launched, hold your horses, but dang, okay. All right. A little inside scoop.
Okay. So what is the lamest way you could see someone using USB 4?
The lamest?
Like you have all this technology literally at your fingertips and all this bandwidth and speed. What's the...
Oh, that would be my mom. She's going to go... I'm going to get her a USB 4 host and a device. And then and I'm not going to send a cable, and she's going to buy some cable that fits on both ends. She's going to plug it in, it goes, it works great.
Good job, honey. All right. Predictions, we'll see if that comes true.
Are we going to see USB 4.0 on any, I don't know, future spacefaring voyages like the New Horizons? Because for it to be truly universal, I think it needs to leave the planet Earth, right? Seems kind of like a stupid name if it's just an Earthbound technology.
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan. I think
All right.
maybe I'll
Is that a dumber
figure out
question?
how I
Use
can,
it to drive some space lasers.
No, I think it's a good opportunity for me to maybe have an opportunity to test something in space.
Yeah.
That would be I like the way you're thinking.
Business trip to Mars?
It'd be my opportunity to test USB in space.
That would be
Who
an
knows
out of
the
this world
effects?
opportunity.
Yes.
Ew.
Thanks
There-
for the idea.
Yeah. Was that question dumb enough for you?
That was good. That was better. Yes. Okay. That's it. We're out of time.
Thanks,
We're
Jake.
like
All right.
out of
Thank
tape
you.
on our B-roll. Thank you so much for being on. Is there anything people should do now that they know USB4 is coming? Is there anything you want them to do?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, even though the Spec and the CTS are not released, if customers have early silicon, Keysight can help them today with doing early silicon testing.
Okay.
So this is an opportunity for customers to get ahead in this ecosystem. So we can help them today.
Okay, so if you're working on early USB 4.0 silicon, let us know. You know Jit Lim. You know his email address. You know, there's probably a character in the middle, and then at keysight.com. And then also, please go rate and review this podcast. Check us out on the Keysight Podcast YouTube channel and W's Talk Tech in your favorite podcast engine. Please review. That's how we get found. That's how the algorithms know that
This is the
you
only
actually
time they
like us.
let me leave my desk. So please
right.
help us produce more of these.
He's in a cage, and every time a review comes through, we unlock one of the bolts, and eventually Mike will be free of this building.
Help me.
That's a good place to end it. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for spending your time with us, and we'll see you next time.